Step into the shadows with Paranormal M, your guide to the mysterious and the unknown. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Embark on a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew. Enjoy the ride. Strange light and possible possession after using Ghostbox. Any thoughts? I had an experience years ago that really freaked me out. I've always been skeptical of ghosts and similar phenomena, and I'm not religious, but this is one of the oddest things I've ever experienced. Years ago, probably around 2014, I was visiting family in Colorado. That side of my family is into the paranormal, especially ghosts. Something we do when we meet up is we use a ghost box, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. For those who aren't, it's a radio that scans across channels very quickly and supposedly picks up voices of spirits. Not the most technical definition, but just to cover the basics. Anyways, we decided to use one on one night, but didn't have anything interesting happen. So instead, we decided to swap ghost stories in the backyard, which I always enjoy. Well, about a half an hour into our discussion, my brother starts feeling nauseous. He's saying weird things and acting possessed, which I thought was a cheesy, not so very funny joke. He's pretty funny usually, so I knew something was wrong when the joke was going on for too long. Besides, our interests in the paranormal are typically limited to ghost stories, tarot readings, and energy. Needless to say, this was not in our wheelhouse of typical or expected outcomes. My aunt decided to cleanse the area with some sage, but he was saying it smelled like burning bodies, which isn't the most comfortable thing to hear. Some time goes by and he feels more normal but still nauseous. At this moment, suddenly there was a blue ball of light, maybe a foot or less in diameter, across the yard and past their fence into their alleyway. I saw the light slowly toward the ground. It was lowering. It was shrinking as it descended. Descended seems to be the proper word, as it didn't seem to be falling, as it was much too slow. The ball of light got smaller and smaller until it touched the ground. It then remained stationary for a few seconds, then went out. There was no noise, and it seemed to just pop up out of nowhere. Nobody said a word until it was over, which is when we started freaking out all over again. We searched the next morning for anything that could have caused the light, but there was nothing. We have a few brain cells between the few of us, ruled out flashlights, flares, reflections. My aunt and cousin claimed to be more sensitive to energy, stated that it was quite intense during the experience. Any thoughts on what this could have been? Can't remember if it had been storming, but maybe it was ball lightning. No clue. Please feel free to share below. We still have no idea what happened that night. Experience on the USS Below Wood, LHA-3, 2002. I was a Marine, deployed with the 11th MEU on Belleau Wood. At one point I ended up getting assigned to work with the Navy ship Supply, S8. I think it was. I worked for them for a month during the day with nothing unusual happening. At the end of the month I volunteered to work for them for another month. If I could get work the one night shift spot, they agreed. And since no other Marines wanted to get faped out to work for the Navy, I got the spot. Basically, that meant that any time any section, engineer, aviation mainly, needed a part at night, I went to get it from one of the many storage rooms throughout the ship. There came to be 3 storage rooms I preferred not going to: C, CA, and CB. They were by far the biggest storage rooms, and in the bowels of the ship, which are supposed to be completely sealed from the rest of the ship other than one path that you take to get to them to prevent from flooding. That was in the event of a hull breach. Yet, in what was perhaps the most isolated part of the ship, I would hear voices and other indications of movement. The first few times I would call out asking who was there, I would never receive a reply or investigate the noises, which sounded like somebody else doing the same job I was, moving things around, either storing, sorting, or retrieving parts, never finding anything out of place. Eventually, I pretended I didn't hear anything and got in and out as fast as possible. At the end of my second month, on the last day, I casually, jokingly said something like, "By the way, I'm pretty sure CCA and CB are haunted." All the Navy personnel in the room just kept looking at me and nodded and verbally agreed that it was. I still am very skeptical of ghosts or any kind of afterlife, but I still can't explain what I experienced. I tend to lean toward Occam's razor, the easiest explanation being at 0200 I'm kind of the most isolated part of the ship all by myself and my mind's having a bit of fun at my expense. But truthfully, I've never been able to just accept that explanation, especially given the reaction I got when I finally brought it up. Perhaps it was bleed over from another Belleau Wood in another universe, but whatever it was, the USS Belleau Wood is now an artificial reef, so whatever was going on is a problem for the fish now. Owl or large-winged creature swooping car. Around 10 or 15 years ago, me and a friend were driving down River Road with some winged creature swooping in the hood of my car, surrounding and blocking both the windshield and wrapping around the passenger and driver's side windows, then disappeared. I can provide more information about the location if somebody has a similar experience. As we're driving, I'm telling her this story about the sleep paralysis demon I saw in a dream. It looked like a winged demon, made of molten stone with red eyes, trapped behind a stone prison that it escapes and chases me. It's dark out, maybe 9-10 p.m. And as I'm telling this story, as we drive under a large willow tree and something drops out of the sky and swoops the hood of the car, filling my entire windshield. It then wrapped around my side windows with wings. My friend screams, I stop the car. I remember it now as an owl with feathery wings, but part of me remembers red eyes, black fleshy wings, and a human face. But I'm not sure if that's just because of what images were already running around in my head when it happened as I was telling the story. There are owls where we were, so I was wondering if maybe that's something owls do. Swoop headlights or something. But there's no owls that would be large enough to explain what I saw. Just barn owls, and I've seen them before. I thought I'd ask around if anybody else has ever experienced something like this, as it's always bothered me, and a friend is just sick of me asking her what she remembers. She just says it was weird and she was too scared, closed her eyes. Need this to be explained by skeptics. I wouldn't say I'm a believer, nor would I say I'm a skeptic either. I'd say there's plenty of things science has yet to prove or disprove, and whether or not there are other things beyond what we can see are real. And I've had plenty of weird experiences, kind of happen along the way that I can easily explain rationally. Half asleep, kind of just felt hands caressing my face. Well, probably some form of sleep paralysis. Creepy feeling like something's been watching me. It's a common feeling that anybody would feel if they'd been alone a lot. Figure at the foot of the bed. Again, sleep paralysis, or maybe something my mind just conjured from lack of sleep. But I can't seem to find a rational explanation for this particular experience that happened years ago at my parents' place. Just for context, my parents live in a pretty big house, lots of empty rooms, and I've always felt a little bit off whenever I visit, but I've usually ignored the feeling. Again, the uneasiness was probably due to the fact that the house is large and has a lot of empty space. As a teenager and young adult before I moved out, I usually conduct my studying/work in the guest/dining room. A little more private and quiet than my own room, parents' room was right next to mine. Their TV would often be loud. It has a large wooden dining room table, the sort with heavy glass on the top that can fit around 10 people around it. So this happened a few years in the middle of the night. I was in this dining room. The air conditioner was on. I had a jug of water next to me. My laptop was on. My partner called me and I left the room to speak with him. I switched off the air conditioning, but when I returned, not longer than 30 minutes later, I sat on my chair and rested my elbows on the glass table to get back to work. But then, the glass starts sliding. Before I knew it, a gush of water splashed on my lap. I jolted, removed my things to see that the entire table was filled with water in between the glass and the table. I looked at my jug of water, still the same level of water in there. Needless to say, I was freaked out, more worried about my laptop than anything electronic related there. I removed my things and went to go get my parents. It took all three of us to remove the heavy glass and took some time to remove all the water. My parents, for some reason, thought I had somehow placed the water there and were upset it happened, because of course the table was expensive. It wasn't until later in the day that this event came back to me and goosebumps appeared all over my arms thinking about it. How on earth did that much water get there? So I tried my hardest to find an explanation, and here's what I came up with. A. Condensation. Perhaps switching off the air conditioning helped create the right environment to cause enough condensation that water overflowed underneath. But not only is this implausible, but never has this ever happened before or after the incident. B. I had a psychotic breakdown which led to me splashing water there with the jug of water I had. But again, the water is still in the jug, and I was and am a pretty physically weak person. So there's no way I'd have removed the glass to be able to splash water onto it. Keep in mind, the water was all over the table, not in one corner. C. My parents did it when I was away, but why? D. The water was already there, built up over time from condensation, but then I'd noticed it before. I was in the dining room for hours before this incident, so no way I would have noticed this. No matter how I try to rationalize this incident myself, I can't find an explanation. Everybody I've told to said it's probably something paranormal. I've had other experiences in my parents' home, but again, all I could pretty much explain, except for this. All these years later, I've never had the same experience happen again, and I use that dining room to this day. Since everybody I've spoken to has said this is paranormal, I'd like to hear your thoughts, especially the skeptics who might be able to give a rational explanation to this. The condensation thing seems pretty valid, given that water is clear, and you very well might not have noticed it. I've seen a white hole/breach during a storm as a child. I was in 5th grade, 10 years old. We were in a class upstairs and there was a huge storm outside. Everybody had a chill when lightning struck. Lightnings were getting closer and closer. I was fascinated by it, especially because I was sitting near the window. Then a lot of lightnings started to strike at the same time, and a big one was really close to us. This big lightning was really, really, really strange. It enlightens us for a whole second, which is pretty long for lightning. I could have seen some of the white hole, almost like a breach in space. I seen it for a whole second, too. I asked my school friend who was sitting next to me, "Have you seen this, the white hole?" And he was affirmative. My younger self liked to imagine it was some of a dimensional breach for some creature to come into our world. Every time since I heard somebody talking about a paranormal event, I'm like, maybe the responsible of this event come from that breach. Of course, I don't believe it, but it's a fun theory. Bachelor's Grove. I visited the cemetery with a couple of friends in the spring of 2017. We arrived there around 6:30 p.m., parked at the small lot across the road from the cemetery, and made our way over. I was in a photography class at the time and brought a school-issued camera with me to take pictures. Walking into the cemetery felt sort of overwhelming, like we had walked into a lively party where everybody suddenly went quiet and stared at us. Even though we were the only ones there, I took some pictures in the cemetery, and after a while, we decided to walk deeper into the woods. This would turn out to be a mistake. As the three of us walked along the creek, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that was setting in. Despite it still being pretty light out, due to it being early spring, the leaves hadn't yet grown back, so we would see pretty far in every direction. Something that still creeps me out about this place is the lack of sound. I listened for the chirps, the scurries of wild animals, but the only sound in the woods was our footsteps in the leaves in the creek. My camera, fully charged, died a few times. When I turned it back on, still had full battery. We came across multiple round clearings in the woods. There are rumors of dark magic and rituals taking place here, so at the time I attributed it to that. There was a picnic bench in one of the clearings. Took a picture of my friends on a cell phone standing on the bench part. They were smiling when I took the photo, but when I looked at their faces, they were distorted. My female friend appeared sad and scared, while my male friend appeared angry. But they were perfectly fine. A few minutes after that picture, my phone mysteriously went missing. We searched all over the area and were still right by the picnic bench, so I figured it couldn't be far. That was until the sun started to go down. We realized that we needed to get the hell out of there. We ditched the phone and my female friend managed to lead us out. As we were leaving, I saw a completely black shadow figure with a brimmed hat walking parallel to us, maybe 10 feet into the woods. It was walking through dense wood and made no sound. I have no idea why I didn't react to it at this moment, but when I asked my male friend about this later, he said he saw it too. When we got back to my house, some unfortunate events went down with my family that were mostly likely inevitable, but I think the energy I brought back certainly could have contributed. When I brought the camera to my room, the energy seemed to shift, and I saw several figures and anomalies as I scrolled through the photos. I deleted them all right then. Everything felt more normal after that, though the energy in my living room where the family thing happened was off until we moved out. Even my completely skeptical mother admitted that the lighting, looked wrong and things felt off in that room after this. I'm still interested in haunted places and the paranormal, but this experience made me way more wary of these things. Something ripped an animal to shreds. I'm not really sure if this would be considered a paranormal story per se, but nothing else really makes sense. Let me explain. My family would go camping every chance we got. The place we'd always go had no natural predators, or at least nothing bigger than a fox. My dad specifically chose this spot, so us kids, me and my two siblings, could frolic through the woods without having to worry. This particular trip was during the May long weekend. There was still a considerable amount of snow, so my dad brought our ATVs and some sleds for us. It was the day after that we had arrived, and my dad wanted to go on a little trip down the road. I asked if I could come, and he said sure. We both hopped on his quad and set out on our little trip. I forgot to mention earlier that we had a deer around the area. Nothing crazy, but the odd one would wander through our campsite. You could tell they had no natural predators since they didn't run away when there was a human around. My siblings and I would always manage to get pretty close to one, before my parents yelled at us to stay away, that is. Anyway, my dad and I were a few miles from the campsite. That's when we rounded a corner, came across, the most gruesome sight I've ever seen in my life. On the side of the road there were pieces of a deer, At least I think it was one. There was blood absolutely everywhere, and worse still, there was steam coming from the remains, which meant this was recent. My dad's usually a pretty calm guy, not much can rattle him, but I could tell you that this freaked him the hell out. He was in the process of turning us around when this, screech came out of the forest. It was so loud that we both flinched. I remember searching the forest for the source, but my dad was in the process of hauling ass down the way we came. It could have been a trick of the light, or because I was freaked out and maybe I was seeing things, but I could have sworn I saw something running alongside us, but only for a second or two. I know I sound absolutely crazy, but the thing looked like a large dog before it vanished into the trees. My dad raced back to camp and we were all packed up and headed to a different location by the end of the day. We never did go back to that campsite after this encounter. I did ask my dad about it a couple of years ago. He said it was because the new campsite was better than the old, better trails and whatnot. I think he's full of crap. I think whatever we encountered that day scared the hell out of him. I think that whatever I saw, he did too. But I, for one, I'm thankful that we never went back. I'm not sure if I'd be able to sleep at night after what I saw. It still haunts me to this day. My ghost flame story. My family moved from Kansas to Tennessee in the year 2000. I made some friends at my new high school and we were all hanging out on Halloween. Someone told us about a local legend, a legend called the Ghost Flame. A few of my friends wanted to go check it out. They invited me to go with them. I was skeptical, but I went out of curiosity. The legend goes like this. There's a haunted cemetery way out in the boondocks. If you park on the side of the gravel road of the entrance, turn off your headlights, you can see a ghost flame hovering over a grave. It sounded like someone was trying to pull a prank on me. One of the guys borrowed his dad's car. We all drove out there. We parked at the entrance, cut off the headlights. Waited about 5 minutes and someone shouted, "Oh my God, look." There it was, a tall flame hovering above a grave, just in front of the headstone. The driver of the car turned the headlights on and the flame instantly disappeared. He turned them off and it slowly came back. Couldn't believe what I was seeing, but the skeptic in me didn't want to be the butt of some practical joke, so I walked up to the cemetery to check it out. As I approached this flame, I could see that it was actually hovering. It was hovering about 6 inches off the ground. It was a pretty tall flame, not short like a candle, more like a torch. As I got closer, it began to dim until it went out just as I walked up to the grave. I thought surely somebody set a torch of some kind, but nothing. I would have seen or heard somebody running off into the woods. The graves were all too small to hide behind. The grave was a large granite slab, so nothing could be buried on the ground. I could not come up with a logical explanation for the life of me. The other kids in the group were just as dumbfounded as I was. We weren't really terrified, we were more in awe and disbelief than anything. I'd never seen anything so bizarre in my life. That was so long ago. I was new to the area and I didn't know where I was, so I don't really remember where the cemetery was. But I think I have it located at using Google Earth, and I thought about going back one day with a video camera. Something different in my parents' house. My parents have lived in this same house for over 30 years. I lived here from age 6 to 17 when I moved to another city for college. After that, I graduated and started working there. I would come visit, but just a couple of times throughout the year. Now, about 10 years ago, I had a near-death experience. I almost drowned at the beach, and I had a sensory memory coming right back when I was about to drown. I could feel the memories as if I was inside of them. The one I still remember very vividly is the warmth and smell of my mother's lips when she kissed me on the nose when I was little. She used to kiss me like that whenever we were cuddling, or when she would kind of pick me up at school. I also remembered the touch of my father's warm hands whenever he touched my feet to wake me up, or how my closest friends and I hug each other so tight for so long. It felt amazing. I felt all of that and more. But I also felt something changed in me. I started to feel vibes in people. I cut people off my life entirely because I started to feel like they were not honest or good people, which turned out to be very accurate. In a party I attended, I met some of my sister-in-law's relatives, and one uncle in particular gave me a weird feeling. Couldn't explain it, but something about him didn't sit right with me. I only mentioned it to my mom as I was trying to figure it out as I told her. He gives me sexual assault vibes. He does something to his children, I'm sure. A couple months later, my sister-in-law told my mom that this uncle had problems with the whole family and the siblings decided to take the kids away from him, but didn't press any charges. He had been molesting his own children since his wife left him. I also started feeling energies in places I had been before and places I'd never been to, but I felt that something weird was there and I just couldn't explain it. Now, a couple of months ago, I moved back to my parents' house because I bought a piece of land. I'm having my house built, but ever since I came back, I keep seeing these shadows at night passing by, peeking out the door. Sometimes from the corner of my eye, I get to see them. I'd never seen them until now. They seemed curious about me since I caught them watching me. I've also heard some noises, but just tapping on the wall or my desk or the door. Nothing else so far. A disembodied scream up my stairwell as a teen. I was talking to a friend about some old spooky stuff that happened to me living in my old family home. I thought that I would share this story. It's the only crazy paranormal thing that's happened to me with witnesses to confirm that I'm not crazy. This happened back in 2008. I was a junior in high school hanging out with an old girlfriend of mine. Her friend at my house, and while the rest of my family flew out to Washington to visit family the previous night, I'm over in Michigan. The night was like any typical teenager hangout. We ordered pizza, played Guitar Hero, played some homemade spirit game thing with fire. You light the fire, ask the ghost a question. If the fire moves, it means blah blah blah. All dumb, profoundly normal things. For reference, we're all hanging out in the attic, which was my bedroom at the time. The staircase led right onto my living room, which had a bead door at the bottom of them. You can usually hear somebody coming through them to get up, but this shook all of us to our cores. We were well and done playing ghost games and playing Guitar Hero, when out of nowhere, during a break, a blood-curdling scream from a woman shrieked from the bottom of the stairwell. It almost sounded fake, like a corny movie scream, but loud and panicked screamed for sure, and sounded legit. We froze, heard nothing else. No beads, no footsteps, nothing. My house was old, so you often hear and felt people moving around in it, but there was nothing. I got the courage to charge the living room with a pocket knife after yelling that we were calling the cops. But to our surprise, there was yet again nothing. The doors and windows were locked. It was the middle of a particularly nasty Michigan snowstorm. There weren't any footprints outside the house. We all ran outside, went to the end of the short driveway, looking in the window far from an intruder, and, well, called the police. They came, searched the entire house for us, and we all sat in my 90s Pontiac Grand Prix. After about an hour, they came back and found nobody hiding in the house, so after this, ran into the house, grabbed my essentials, my Xbox, my clothes, my phone, my wallet, my backpack, and drove to my best friend's house. I ended up crashing at his place for 3 months after that. I refused to sleep in that house until my family all got home from Washington, and to this day I still have no freaking clue what that was, but it sends shivers down my spine thinking about that scream even as an adult. Nothing else after that happened at the house. Nothing really happened before either. It was random as fuck. Also saw my friend's dead grandma through a window on 2 occasions, along with some other stuff. Does anyone know what could be happening in my house? We lived in a very old house for about 6 years, and in these 6 years, I've seen many things lurking around. For context, I live in a city where we're surrounded by neighbors, but my house was built around 100 years ago, long before there was a city around it. It was originally surrounded by farmland. There's been a lot of questions surrounding exactly when the house was built. The elderly woman that we had bought it from said it was built in 1908 exactly, 100 years before it was born. But we recently had it appraised, and we were told it was likely built in 1926. This was backed up when we found newspapers from the mid-1920s lining the 100-year-old windows while putting in new windows. Moving on to the paranormal part. Ever since we first moved in, I was 8, I'd been seeing things around the house, from people out of the corner of my eye to my name being called while home alone, to full face-to-face meetings with people whom we never met. I had too many experiences to count, and I was always a child with an active imagination, but as I got older I began to realize it might not have been my imagination. I'm only going to be brief, 2 events, but if anybody wants to hear more from me, I'll go into more detail. 1. One night I was 9 or 10, standing in my upstairs bathroom with the door open to the hallway braiding my hair. I saw 2 gray figures walk past the open door into my parents' office, which was right next to the bathroom. Both my parents have light gray hoodies, so I assumed it was them wanting to say something. I now forget what, but something stopped me. And it appears something stopped me. The 2 figures disappeared, and I realized I never heard the door open. I then heard my parents talking in the kitchen, and I realized they were both downstairs. I immediately ran downstairs, but didn't tell them what had happened. These 2 figures showed up multiple times, but none of them were as dramatic as the first time. When I was 11 or 12, every night at sunset, I'd be laying in my bed doing whatever, reading, playing games, but I would see an old lady standing at the edge of my bed just watching me. I was never threatened or scared by her, but she was just there. This went on for a few months, and I thought nothing of it, which was weird because I'm usually easily freaked out by very small things. I told my mom about it, and she told me about how her grandmother would visit her after she passed. She thought it might have been her looking after her great-granddaughter. Thought it was sweet, and went on with my life. This soon stopped, and everything went back to normal. About a year later, my mom found an old photo of one of the previous owners and showed me. It was the same woman I'd been seeing nearly daily for years before. If anybody wants to hear more about the experiences of the house, I'll gladly tell you. It's weird, and an old house, hidden rooms, sound sightings, sleep paralysis, and strange perfumes are all things that have happened, and I'll gladly tell you about it if you like. Just want an explanation. Kiss marks appearing on things. A few months ago I noticed there appears a single kiss mark on the TV downstairs. Thought it was so weird because my mom and dad are obviously not doing it. My brother isn't either, and I didn't. My younger cousin is the one who mostly uses the downstairs TV. She isn't even tall enough to reach the TV. Thought it was so weird, but whatever, I ignored it. My cousin the other day came to me in the morning scared, saying that she saw something in the downstairs bathroom. I heard voices telling her to do things. She's 7, by the way, and I did think it was so weird, so I told her that she could kind of just shower in my room. My parents told her that she was probably having a nightmare, but they're super religious, so they did like some whole ritual screaming prayer thing. Screaming prayer? Apparently, okay. I'm used to it at this point. That night I was laying in bed and noticed a kiss mark on my mirror. I definitely didn't place it there. Mind you, this is out of character for anybody living there to do. I asked them all. They said they have no idea how it got there. Today I looked at the TV again. Noticed instead of there being one kiss mark, there's now multiples. I'm low-key just trying to ignore this, but this is creepy. I've always thought my house was haunted, but I've never seen actual signs. I've always had this theory that fear draws in spirits, and ever since I've started having an inclination to dark things and listening to metal and rock. My parents have been freaking out and saying that they've been having dreams about demons in my room. I think they're ridiculous, but now I'm wondering what if their fear drew in something. My friend said kiss marks aren't threatening, but it could just be my spirit guide. I'm not sure if I believe in spirit guides or not. Anybody have an idea? I will say that I don't think rock music is a sign of anything bad. Just my thought. I dreamt of my brother when he passed away. For context, this happened in 2013, so I was around 8 years old. My brother was 10 years older than me, so when he graduated high school, I was still in elementary school. My memory of him kind of fades as time goes by, but I still have some sweet memories of when I brought him apple slices after he got into a fight with my mom. I also remember seeing him and his friends in front of the school library near the 400-meter track when we did activities, ran to him and hugged him. I think in swimsuits. After he graduated, he went to the U.S. for college. We would sometimes get phone calls from him or FaceTime, but not much, and all I knew is that he was an American attending university. I would also brag about it to my friends like a proud sister, but I also miss him. And I would sometimes ask my parents when he would be returning. My parents would say that he'll be back during the holidays. I got so excited. Then a couple of days in a row, I had super vivid dreams that my brother came back with his luggage, and me running to the door to greet him. I remember that when he stepped into the house, the background behind him was only bright light. I couldn't see our garden as I would usually see. I can remember the rest of the dream, but I think it was just it. I woke up, truly believed that my brother was home, went upstairs to his room to check if he was back, and he wasn't. Then in the afternoon, right after my multiple dreams after school, my parents got a phone call. My mom looked like she was holding back tears. Later in the evening, I remembered my dream, so I shared with my parents that dream about my brother coming back and asked when my brother was coming back. When my mom heard, she started bursting into tears, and my dad brought me aside and just told me not to talk about my brother around my mom. Days after, I didn't have any dreams about my brother coming back. Later, my dad eventually told me that my brother died, and they were informed by the police by phone of this news, and until now, they still won't let me know what happened to him, but only that he passed away. You deserve an understanding of how. It's horrible. I lived in a 200-year-old funeral home. I grew up in a funeral home. Okay, firstly, I'd like to say that if it's hard to believe anything I say on here, trust me, I understand. I've never felt believed while talking about this. When I was 11, me and my family moved into a huge 6-bedroom, 2-bath house. At the time, my mom was a very spiritual person and very into the supernatural. My dad, knowing this, willfully kept the fact that it was a funeral home for my mom, knowing damn well she would have no part living in a house of death. Well, about a year after living there, a priest in a wheelchair knocked on our door, asked if they could speak to one of my parents. My mom, being the only one home, happily invited him in. Since it was so long ago, I don't remember the whole conversation, but basically he informed her that our house used to be a funeral home. To no surprise, my mom was very concerned about this. So the priest, in what I assume was a way to relieve her concerns, offered to cleanse the house. The darkness and the hatred that was felt in that house was still messing with me today. That baptism woke something up and made it very angry. I don't know how to put this without sounding crazy, but basically me and my friends found a tombstone in the basement. This tombstone had a pillar inside of it that was connected to the living room, basically holding up the floor. The tombstone was upside down and broken at the top. It just had one word on it in broad letters and spelled "Wow." I thought nothing of it until I was like 15 and my mom died in that house on the living room floor. It occurred to me that the tombstone didn't say "wow," the tombstone said "fucking mom." I wanted to burn that house down. I know it's all a coincidence, but it is reality. I think I saw a ghost or banshee at my old school. So a little bit of a backstory. I went to a special needs school for 9 years. One of the Tvind schools in Denmark. The buildings are all over 130 years old and has a lot of history, including tuberculosis treatment center. The basement was where the creative things were, like paint, stonecutters, tools, the library, and some other things. Also, I was a 13 or 14-year-old girl at the time. I was also very creative. I loved to go down there after school because I could hide there and be by myself. To get there, you have to walk through a very loud door. You go left 15 centimeters, and go through another door, glass door, and then through the last door. You could always hear it when somebody was coming down there, always. The person that was supposed to take care of me left. I was alone in the basement, in that room. I heard the door and everything close and them walking up the stairs. I then heard a whisper. I couldn't hear what was said, but it was a woman. The one that was taking care of me was a man, so it wasn't him. I looked to where I'd heard the whisper, and this is what I saw. A transparent woman in old-fashioned clothing. From what I could tell, it also looked like something was running down her face. When I think about it now, I think it was maybe blood. We made eye contact, and surprisingly, I wasn't scared because I didn't think about it. It was normal to see things go down there. To hear things. I asked if she was okay. She screamed in a way I can't describe. It reminded me of a banshee scream or a wail. Then she disappeared. The weird thing is, my stepdad's father passed away a little over a week later. To this day, I have no idea what I saw or what I heard. I know banshees are not from Denmark, but that scream was odd and different, not like a normal scream. 21 now, and I'm still as confused as I was back then. My mom and I had the same dream last night. Last night I had a dream that I was at some fancy dinner-like place with my mom's father. I called him Poppy. All I remember from the dream is sitting next to him at the fancy table. And I believe we were exchanging drinks, like I had a Coca-Cola and a fancy wine glass and he had water, but it seemed like we were passing it to one another. He frequently bartended after retirement, and I always remember being so excited to ask for bar coke as a kid. So at first, I chalked the dream up to that. But then this morning, my mom started to tell me that she had a weird dream last night. I immediately spoke up and told her I had a dream about Poppy. She responded with, "Well, that's weird. I had a dream about Poppy too." I told her about how we were at some fancy dinner venue place. She said that her dream was exactly the same, except she was off doing something else at the dinner party rather than sitting with Poppy and I. Which is kind of funny because I don't remember seeing her in my dream at all, which is kind of crazy that her and I had pretty much the same dream about her dad. My brother and I also had the same dream when we were kids. Also with Poppy in it, but before he passed away, it was about her grandparents' dog Molly, and that Poppy had to take her to go get put down. One day a few years ago, my brother randomly told me about this dream and that it was weird to him because he felt like Molly wasn't really there for the next 2 weeks before she actually had to be put down. I was absolutely blown away that I had the same exact dream and feeling about Molly around the same time. Something just let me in my own house. Exactly what I just said. 2 years ago, my mom moved house. Nothing new, we've always moved around. And incidentally, I moved away also. But it's, still home when it's needed. I'm currently here on holiday, and I'm spending my nights in a caravan on the front lawn. Great little van. But I have to keep it locked along with any doors or gates at the house whenever I'm going out or anything because my area is chock-a-block with filthy little thieves. Anyhow, I'm quite dopey, and sometimes I forget things. So tonight, while my mom and stepfather were sound asleep, me being me, I went to grab some munchy food from inside. I opened the screen door only to realize the main door's locked, so I thought, fuck it, I'll just wait for breakfast. Start to walk back down the lawn, and I hear a noise that took me a second to process. The main door just opened. I turn back and I see a shadowy figure in the door. I think it's just Mom because the lights were off in the house. I walk up, open the screen, and start to walk in. I try to push the main door open a bit more, but it was like something or someone was behind it. Checked around the entire front area, then made a beeline for my parents' room where they were both still just laying there asleep. How the heck did my door just open? I'm not even lying, guys. Alrighty then. I checked around the entire front area, then made a beeline for my parents' room where they were both still just laying there asleep. There's absolutely nobody else in the house. And the wind we do get definitely isn't strong enough to open a locked door. What the fuck just opened my door for me? Well, that's a weird serendipitous thing to be reading about. The dogs sat barking at me. When I initially tried to open the door, they stopped right before it went ahead and opened itself too. They still sat at the door, and they just started acting a little bit off after the door opened. My grandma died less than 10 years ago. Had many dreams of her, but she's only spoken once. For context, I was in my preteen stage when my grandma passed. I can recall every dream I've had about her after, and the fact that she never said anything to me until the very last dream. However, she always had a very distinct facial expression. The first dream I had was nearly right after she passed. I believe it was that very same night. She had passed in the early morning. This dream was themed on a Sunday. I know this because before she got emergency custody of me, she'd take me back home on Sundays after coming over that Friday. Got in the car, she didn't look at me or make eye contact, but she had this grim look on her face. No smile, which was very unusual for her. Second time at the door, stays open then. We drive up to a stop sign, make a right, and everything turns and fades into white. Standing around were many, many people, some of which I'd known from my childhood, but had already long away past. Some chatting here and there, but no distinct words I could hear, and then I wake up. The second dream isn't very necessary. Don't know where I was, but my grandpa and I were in this huge warehouse. The only time I saw her, she was laying on the ground, definitely dead. The third dream was years later. I was at their house, the very house she died in. I looked in the hallway and we saw her standing there with an angry look on her face. Also seemed to be disappointed. This is strange because at the time I had gotten bad into drugs and also got diagnosed with alcoholism. I was 15, by the way, so I didn't even know somebody that young could be diagnosed with something of that sort, but it happened. She hated drugs because of my dad and uncle. Believed it was sinful, and rightfully so. The fourth dream was after I got clean off the drugs. I was happy, got a job, finally cut off the people I needed out of my life, and this dream consisted of her and I sitting on the couch. We had the TV tray out in front of us, which was a normal occurrence. She finally looked happy. The only thing she said to me was, "You'll never see me again," the smile on her face. After that, I woke up, and sure enough, I've never had a dream of her since. Some would say it's a weird coincidence, but I'm sure there's much more to it. At least that's what I'd like to believe. Things keep disappearing. So, I have a bad case of apparent black hole in my apartment. Started with knives back when I moved in, had a full set of knives, and one of them would disappear in the span of months within each other. I ended up having to buy more, and now those are disappearing again. If I can recall correctly, let's say a total of 7 or 8 knives have gone missing. Then it was a whole bag of pastries. I put the bag on the table, went out for an hour with my roomie, and when I came back they were gone. I mean the whole bag. I also have some spoons gone. Whole cans of tuna, and as of yesterday, 1 apple of 2 I bought. I found out about the apple because my cat dropped them, but I could only find one and search the whole area and it was gone. No one else but me, my roomie, and my parents have accused the apartment. My parents live almost 400 kilometers away. For the cutlery, I may or may not have threw them away, but the trash on accident, I can't explain the pastries or the apple. There's probably a lot of other stuff missing I'm not remembering, but I'm not noticing. It's been going on for years now, and I wanted to share. The visitors who came to get my grandma. Yesterday, my grandma, who I'm very close to, passed away. She had multiple major strokes in a single night and was suffering a major brain bleed. Doctors said 75% of her brain was damaged and she wouldn't wake up again. We made the decision to end life support as we knew she wouldn't want to be kept alive as a vegetable past her time. I'd always heard stories of people dying and loved ones sitting up before passing or saying the names of those that had died before, or even just opening up their eyes and throwing their arms up. Since my grandma's brain activity was so limited, I knew there would be no such signs. No matter how much I knew, they'd comfort me. The ICU door for my grandma's room was very heavy and had to unlatch it. That stayed closed all day and yesterday to give us some privacy with her. I struggled every time I had to open it as I really push it down to unlatch it. We were all sitting in a room waiting for the final shoe to drop when the door unlatched and opened. It opened up a good ways pretty quickly. Not as it had been shoved, but more like somebody was just opening it. We waited for a nurse to come inside, but nobody was there. Got up, closed the door, making sure to push it hard into place. About 5 minutes later, we heard the hard sound of a door unlatching, and it swung open again with controlled quickness, stopping just short of slamming into a table. This time, we left it open. The doctors were expecting her to survive at least a few days after ending life support, but she died not an hour later after the door opened. At the end, she wasn't in pain, and she passed as if falling asleep. My mom and I are happy knowing that she had people to walk her home. Ghost trees disappearance. I was in the village, and I was spending time with my granny. I basically was there because my mom sent me there to get some rest. Street when she leaves is just the road, if you can call it a road, with private houses along it. There was a house where in front of it was 2 perfectly symmetrical trees. This trees was about 10 meters high. It was looking like tree poles that were uprooted from the earth. There's no leaves and even branches on it. Top of this trees was like the bottom of an average uprooted tree. Roots was on top of it. They both was almost black. I believe they was like dried up. Maybe it was pine trees. It was cutted, but how they managed to dry so much. If that way it was cutted decades ago. Also, why is there such enormous trees? It was not an half-abandoned wild village in the middle of nowhere. It was just a small settlement in town a couple of kilometers from normal town. At some point when I visited my grandma again, there was no trees, but not even a land without grass on spots where there was, or something. Of course, no one knows nothing what trees I was talking about. I remember there was a photo of little me with this trees in the background. Exact same trees, not as pine trees, but that identical black dead pillars. But guess what? I can't find it. There's a bunch of black and white photos of my grandmother's fathers and other relatives with that trees in the background. Not as pine trees, but that identical black dead fucking pillars. And guess what? I know they were there. I can feel when my mom is being targeted by black magic. To be honest, I didn't believe in the paranormal stuff before, but now I'm not sure anymore. My mom's ex has been doing black magic to her. I don't know what you call it, really. She has screenshots of him talking about it, and my mom show a person that does magic too. And she told her that, she had something like a cursed and a dead person was following her. To me, all that sounds crazy, but the thing I feel is every time my mom feels it. Other than misfortune, my mom can get sick and gets a really bad backache. She says that she feels like it's burning. She's gone to the doctor and she's 100% healthy. I always told her that it was in her mind, but one day I was visiting her and she told me she was feeling it. So I walked to her and started giving her a massage while she was sitting down. A few seconds later, I start to feel a rage that I've never felt in my life. Then I started crying and having a panic attack. And in my mind, I thought it was maybe my head playing tricks on me, but after that, every time my mom feels the burning in her back, I feel a tingle in the top of my head. Like my head is freezing and a wave of sadness comes and I start crying. No matter how far we are, every time I feel it, I call her or text her and ask if she's feeling it, and every time I'm correct. I don't know what to do. Guess I just wanted to tell somebody and get it off my chest. I had a panic attack a few minutes ago because of it. My mom was, of course, feeling it too, and my life's been kind of messed up lately, and I don't know, it's just my bad luck or something. Maybe something's actually messing with me, just tired of it. Also, when I was a kid, I remember seeing something and feeling weird stuff, and my mom got some people from church to spray holy water around the house. Thought it was just my kid's imagination. I don't know if I should believe my head anymore. That's a weird one. Someone else was there. This isn't my story, but my dad's. But I feel it is worthwhile telling it here. My dad was a builder. He was contracted to the local council to carry out works on council buildings. This is in the UK, and this also includes homes and flats. My dad was told his place of work would be in a flat building, with multiple rooms, 3 levels. Homes and flats like these, or when nobody lived in them at the time, they're called voids. The building's just empty rooms. When this happens, the council put big heavy metal doors on the building to prevent thieves from getting in. You need a set of keys provided by the council. To get ahead of myself, my dad wanted to see the scale of work that he would be undertaking, rather than going up there completely under-equipped and unprepared. So my dad opens up and takes a look around. 4 rooms on the ground floor, same on the second, third all connected by a staircase which had a central shaft through the middle. You could see right to the ceiling on the 3rd floor. Stairs have metal bars for railings. Big job, but achievable in a few days. Got the whole place, replaster a few walls, and a repaint job. My dad goes to lock up, but he feels someone behind him. This, I am told, is not uncommon. Local people see builders go into empty buildings and they want to see what they can take. So naturally, my dad turns around. "Mate, you're gonna have to leave. I'm locking up." But he said it to no one. No one was around him or had been in the building. Thinking this is just an odd sensation, he thought nothing else about it, locked up, went home. My dad told my mom what had happened, but it was more of a passing remark, like, "Oh, this happened today, weird, huh?" Nothing else was said. Anyway, the weekend passes, and my dad and his friend Martin go back up to do the job on Monday, begin opening up and proceeding with the work. A local resident walks up and asks them how things are going, which both agree it's going well, and some other small talk. He changes the subject. "It's a shame what happened in there, isn't it?" Both my dad and his working friend were confused. "A shame? What's a shame?" "Poor girl came home from school a few months ago and saw her dad hanging, tied himself up to the railing and jumped." My dad, of course, was now scared and felt that familiar shiver go up him. He didn't tell the local guy what he had felt, but he told his friend. Martin refused to go into the building alone, and they both agreed that they would always leave the central door open to make sure there was an exit if needed. My dad would be the first to tell me, he doesn't really believe in ghosts. And would also sort of say he's never seen a ghost. But he did say this was the oddest experience he's ever had, and still cannot explain it. The Baker Boy. When my mother was a little girl, she spent her early years in a remote area of Mexico. No electricity, no running water, and definitely no air conditioning. But due to so many people all living in one small house, it wasn't uncommon for her and a few others of her siblings to fall on the porch, or fall asleep on the porch. Yeah, you heard that right, and they slept on pallets outside. She recalls it was actually much cooler some nights on the porch than it was in the house. The porch had a screen that my grandfather installed, and he also built their house by his own hand. The closest neighbor was miles away, so from my understanding, the house was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Now this is where the ghost story begins. My mom and 3 of her other siblings were the lucky ones who got to sleep outside every night. They never had any problems or fears until the night the Baker Boy began to come around. A small child with golden curls dressed in white baking attire, wearing a mask that was like a skinned pig. He would walk in circles around the house reciting a certain phrase that my mom never really understood, because it wasn't in Spanish or English. At first they were scared, but over time they grew to appreciate his presence. It was almost as if he were walking around the house to protect them from whatever fate had maybe happened to him. They never knew who he was or if he was even real, just that they would all see him. My grandpa never believed them, assumed they were making it up to come inside the house, but they swore they weren't. It wasn't until over time an outline of his path began to show up around the house. Needless to say, they didn't stay in that house much longer and moved before they eventually made it into the States. The strangest part is that before my grandpa died, he told my mom he had finally seen him, the blonde boy with the pig mask. Ghosts I would communicate with in my old house. When I was younger, about 4 or 5, I would talk to ghosts. I was only told this by my parents recently. They told me that I'd always talk to a man that stood in the front of my bedroom window, and when asked who I was talking to, I would reply with George. Obviously, as I was only 4 or 5 at the time, I have no memory of what I would be talking about, but we lived next to an old man called Mr. Todd, who my parents were close to. My mom ended up asking who lived in the house before us, and surely enough, he replied with George. When my mom asked if he has anything to do with the bedroom window, as that's where I would always talk to him, Mr. Todd said that he would always spend his time at the window just looking out of it. And that's how he would spend most of his days. I've been told that I was a very weird child growing up, and that story isn't the only ghost I would talk to. As my parents describe it, I'd always talk to a man up on the top wardrobe. Unfortunately, I haven't been told much about this one, as it's always overshadowed by the George story. I would also go on about having a past life, and how I would bring up my other family. I have a feeling that I had a past life in the time frame of World War I or II. My reasoning is that my older brother, 7 years older, told me that one day I started singing an old war song, word for word, which neither my parents or brother had ever heard before. Being a believer of past lives, I find it fascinating as I've had my own experience of it, yet frustrating that I was so young that my memory of it is all limited. Heard a voice speak to me while on the phone with my girlfriend. This happened a few months ago, but I still remember vividly what happened. On September 7th, I was alone in my room at around 1:30 a.m. on a phone call with my girlfriend. I was the only one awake in the house at the time. Me and her sleep together on the phone, so we call each other every night and still do to this day. We were talking as usual, and obviously nothing was scary or eerie. I had my lights off in my room, so the light was my phone right in front of me. My room's pitch black with the light off as I expected, so it wasn't scary for me. But that's not what spooked me. As she's telling me about her day at work, I hear a very low voice saying something coming from where my door is, but very quietly to the point where it was almost a whisper. I couldn't make out any words, but I could tell it was a speech. I told my girlfriend to be quiet for a second so I could listen. First, I thought it was my brother whose room's right next to mine, but he was already asleep, and he does the same routine to go to bed every day. He uses the restroom outside our rooms, turns into the hallway, turns the light on, closes the room to his door, and turns off his light. And this happened an hour before I heard his voice. His voice is not that deep, he's 15 years old. And since he hangs out with his friends over Discord, I know what his voice sounds like. I know it even through the walls and the pitch. This was not him. I could hear it clearly as if he was standing in my room right past the door. But I couldn't see anything, so I used my phone flashlight and tried to see what was out there without getting out of bed. After looking around a few minutes, I decided it was time for bed, told my girlfriend that we should just go to sleep. I woke up the next morning as usual, and nothing scary has happened since. Skeptic Mother's Paranormal Experience. So yesterday, my mom told me a story about something that's happened to her at work. My mom's always been a huge skeptic, as I have been myself, but this has properly freaked us both out as we can't explain it. I'm curious to see what others think. My mom works at a pharmacy as a dispenser. She has a colleague that she talks to every day who's also a skeptic, but has an interest in the paranormal. She told my mom a story about how she went to visit a graveyard and visited a loved one with one of her friends. They were the only ones in the graveyard, but they heard a female humming. They assumed it was somebody crouching behind a grave tending to it and had a look around. They eventually came to a grave where the sound appeared to be coming from, but nobody was there. They checked their phones and other devices, and nothing. A little freaked out, they went to the pub nearby and had some food. As they were chatting, they both went silent at the same time and froze as they could hear the humming again. They carried on eating and eventually parted to go home. Later that night, my mom's colleague got a call from her friend who was hysterical. She cried down on the phone and she just heard the humming in her house. Mom's colleague calmed her down and reassured her that there was nothing and she was probably just hearing things. After putting the phone down, she went upstairs to bed pretty late and she heard the humming in her bedroom. My mom, upon being told this, wasn't that amazed as she just brushed it off as a story, being the skeptic she is. She left the room, walked down the long hallway leading to the top of the stairs, and she says she heard a faint humming right behind her. Different notes, but only lasting 2 or 3 seconds. She turned around to laugh at her colleague, thinking she was, taking the mick, but nobody was there. Her colleague was still in the room on the other end of the hallway, too far away to be heard, and nobody else was on the floor with them. There's no PA system or any kind of speakers. I've never seen my mom so freaked out before. She's a very straight-laced person, really. And always tries to debunk anything paranormal. Can't think of anything else either. What do you guys think? See ya.